Before I start here, I'm going to recount something for you that occurred to me in the winter spring semester of my junior year. As a life science major, I had to have about 9 hours of English, that sort of stuff. What would they have called that? Well, no, but anyway. So I needed about 9 hours of that stuff, or fine arts, literature, that sort of thing. And I'd already taken my 2 courses in music appreciation. You sit there and listen to music and appreciate it, and well, there wasn't a whole lot to it, okay? But I was just thumbing through the paper catalog for the classes for that next semester, and in the English section, strange that I would even look there, but it had this title of Spiritual Wastelands. And the description was fairly non-informative, just said we will be looking at several spiritual wastelands. There will be books to read and papers to write and that sort of thing. And so I went and looked at the bookstore and saw some of the books. One of them was by Mark Twain, and okay, whatever. So I signed up, and the first day of class, it's January, Central Illinois. It's cold, and we were waiting, and at most universities, if it gets to 10 minutes after the start of the class and the professor's not there yet, you are free to get up and leave. So it gets 5 after, 6, 7, 8. We don't know anybody in there. We start looking at each other. Maybe we can get up and leave here in a second. But about 9 after, the door opens, and the professor walks in, and immediately when I look at him, I'm thinking to myself, I've made a big mistake. He was apparently a Vietnam War veteran, because he had an Army surplus kind of jacket on. I assumed it was his. And he had a coat on and a backpack on his shoulder. At early 70s, the only people who used backpacks were the hippies. Okay? They're ubiquitous today, but not then. So he's got his backpack on, and he walks over to the desk. He puts his backpack on the desk, and he takes his jacket off, and then he's got one of those blue work shirts on, and it's open down to the middle of his hairy chest, and he has a necklace with shark teeth on it. And I just, he's got hair down through here, and okay, so he just sits on the front of the desk here, and he just looks out the class. There was maybe, 10, 11, 12 people in the room. And he says, well, we're not going to do anything today. You'll get your assignments. You just make sure you have the books here when we start next time. And he didn't even give us a reading assignment. I just have one question for everybody. I just want to go around the room here, and I just want you all to tell me why you took this course. And I said, oh, jeez, really? I was a new believer.
What course was this again?
Why did you take this course?
No, what was the course?
Spiritual Wastelands.
Okay.
And an English class. And I was a new believer, about a year and a half or so. And no, not even quite a year. And so I was curious about spiritual wastelands, and so he's going down, and there's a big football player, probably down in this row, all the way in the back, and he comes. Well, I was talking to coach, and coach kind of said this was easy. Well, he said it was a good class to take, so I signed up. Okay. Kind of comes back up the next row, and there's this young lady twirling her hair, and she said, well, I was talking to my advisor, and she said, I think you two would actually get along. You ought to call her up. Anyway, so I went to the bookstore and I looked at the books and I liked the covers, so I signed up. Okay. Comes with a guy who's sitting right in front of him, front and center. He's got his plastic pocket protector on. He's got all the different color of pens just lined up neatly. And he said, well, I really don't like to read, but I've never read anything of a spiritual nature before, so I thought this would be a very interesting educational experience. Okay, so I'm sitting in the center row, and I'm a couple of seats back, and he kind of has to lean over a little bit, and I said, well, I'm a Christian, and I'm just curious about what sorts of spiritual wastelands you're going to talk about. And he leans over. What? You're a Christian? I want to hear from you. And I'm thinking, I don't. But I'm male. I was just challenged, and I'm not going to back away. So I stayed in the class, and most of that was, well, it was supposed to be class discussion. We'd read something, we'd come to class, we'd talk about it, but most of the time it was a one-on-one conversation, me and the professor, and everybody else just kind of stayed out of it. There were times we'd talk about biblical things, and he talked about the Adam and Eve story at one point, and he said, no, what kind of God is this? He puts them in this garden and says, you can eat anything you want, just don't eat from this one. Well, what do you think they're going to do? Don't eat that. Well, of course they're going to eat from that tree. What's he trying to do to these people anyway? Okay. And then Jesus is talking about the Sabbath, but he's Lord of the Sabbath, and basically if he wants to heal on the Sabbath, he can do that. And he's, no, what kind of God is this? Supposedly he's the one who gave him the law, and here he comes along and he's breaking the law right in front of everybody. He probably didn't know that was a law the Pharisees added. It wasn't actually in the scriptures. But, so yeah, and we had to write 15 pages of papers. And he said you can write 15 one-pagers, you can write one big 15-page. I don't care how you do it. But it's just due by the end of the semester. And, he said you could do whatever you want, whenever, or how many you want. But it got towards the halfway point, and nobody had written anything, turned in anything. So he kind of goaded us a little bit. And, I really didn't like the way he handled the Adam and Eve thing. And so I just wrote about a 4.5 page paper trying to defend the standard traditional understanding of Adam and Eve, and I used both Old and New Testament passages and to help accomplish that. And when I get the paper back, I think he gave me like a B- or something like that. And one of his comments was, "You write as if the Old and New Testaments are written to support each other, but they're completely different documents that have nothing to do with each other." I swear, they're in the same book I've got. I mean, it's just, so that didn't set very well with me. So we got to the end of the semester, and so I still needed to write about 10, 11 pages of a paper, and that comment really bothered me. So I decided I was going to write a paper on the unity of the scriptures, and I knew that the book of Hebrews discussed a lot of the Old Testament in the context of Jesus' ministry and now the early church age. And so, I'll just write from the book of Hebrews. I didn't know at the time that the book of Hebrews is one of the most difficult New Testament books to interpret. Did I go to the local Christian bookstore and ask, can you find a small, cheap, it's the end of the semester, all of us students have run out of money, so that wouldn't work very well. But I didn't do that. I could have gone to my Bible study leader from Campus Crusade for Christ and asked him about it, got to get some older experience. But no, I didn't do that either. I just opened my Bible to the book of Hebrews and I just started writing. So we turned our papers in, the final papers on the last day of class, and he had an office in the English building up on the 3rd floor or whatever. And he said, okay, in this room, there are a bunch of cubby holes, and your course and number will be marked, and all your papers will be in that little box. And so just come by and leaf through and find your paper, and the grade will be there. By the time we didn't have a final, that last paper was your final, so no final exam. So on the day your final exam would have been given, that's when they'll be ready for it. So it's a little fear and trepidation. I make my way to the English building, walk up to the 3rd floor and find the room, walk in, there's a bunch of cubby holes there. And so I find the one for our class, and I pull my paper out, and of course there's just a title page. And I turn over and it's just, red pencil everywhere. And he's writing comments, he's underlining, scratching out, and I could, as I'm he's getting angry. I turn the 2nd page, and it's just more of the same. 3rd page, more of the same. I mean, the guy was so angry, he was pressing down so hard, you could have read his comments by turning the page like this and just follow the indentations. So I'm not looking forward to, I turn to the 4th page and there's nothing there. Nothing else was written until the very last page. I just assumed he knew he was spending far too much time with this paper. It was getting him too upset. So I'll just read it and we'll get to the end and give the guy a grade. And here we go. Well, I turned, I wish I had kept that paper, because what he said on the final page, the first couple of phrases were, "This is the most ridiculous, ad hoc, blah, 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 blah paper I have ever read." A. And I thought, well, he was probably about ready to put an F on there, but an angel came along and, no, not that. How could that be what he wanted to give me, Now, in the course of that class, I felt like I did some things well, some things I didn't do so well, but that's just one of the experiences that I'm using to talk about. I spent, as I told you before, 15 years in secular universities, and more than half of that time as a graduate student. And as grad students, you get much more access to professors and far more discussion than you would as an undergraduate with lectures and that sort of thing, and multiple choice tests. So that's what this presentation is all about. Both from some of the things I felt God had shown me and taught me, as well as some of the things I wish I had another chance to do over. So 4 points here. Now, what this week has all been about has been trying to help you to learn to think like a Christian, to think within the context of a Christian worldview. The second is you need to cultivate a teachable spirit. Something I ran into frequently, at least several times in my graduate student studies, was finding out that most of these professors did not like to have Christians in their class. Christians tended to be argumentative. And if you're talking about things like evolution, well, they would try to tell you why you're wrong. They don't appreciate that. And I'm going to suggest, don't ever do that. Don't ever try to tell a professor in a university classroom that you think they said something wrong. It's not going to go well with you, as the Old Testament likes to suggest. We'll get to that. Pursue excellence. That simply means do the best you can. We'll go into a little bit more detail with that, but pursue excellence. All of us are different kinds of students, different level of students. We have different things we're good at, certain things we're not, but just do the best you can. And last, be faithful. What that's going to mean is be faithful to the task that God has given you. And I'll skip ahead here a little bit, and you just need to realize that wherever you are, that's where God wants you. That's God's will for you. And if you're in these classes, well, that's God's will for you too. You're right where He wants you to be. Even if you think you made a mistake by signing up for this course, well, you're in it. Okay? So that's now God's will. So think Christianly. This verse from 2 Corinthians 10 is rather strange. It says, we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. What do you think that means? Taking every thought captive, first of all, and then to make it obedient to Christ. What's he talking about?
Basically training your mind how to think good and before God.
Think good, did you say?
Well, and along with what God wants.
Along with what God wants. Okay. Okay.
Like kind of thinking through the information that you've been given
But it says obedient to Christ. What's that part mean?
and kind of making sure that you're putting it in a lot. You're putting it in light of how Jesus,
How he might
how he
think about it.
Mhm.
Okay? Well, what I suggest he's talking about here is simply, as you said, we need to see the world as Jesus sees it. We need to understand ideas and events as we think Jesus might understand it, or how he might try to explain what we're hearing, what we're reading. But in order to do that, you need to know Jesus. I was going to bring it in here, but this idea of knowing Jesus, I don't mean that in a strictly salvation sense, okay? When we say, I've accepted Jesus as Lord and Savior of my life, what most of us really only mean is that, well, I've accepted him as my Savior. If Jesus, however, is truly Lord of your life, you're appealing to him throughout your day to see, what's my next step, Lord? How do I answer this? What do I do with that? Where do you want me to go? For the most part, we're still Lord of our lives after we become a Christian. The little book I was referring to, I wish I'd brought in here, is simply called The Gift of Being Yourself. The Gift of Being Yourself. And it's adventure to say that if you fully know yourself, you will know yourself as Jesus knows you. And if you know yourself as Jesus knows you, then you will begin to know him as well. You can't know yourself as Jesus does unless you know Jesus. And this is a lifelong process. This is not something that you read a book and you're done. This is a process, and it takes a lifetime. And I want to strongly encourage you, if you don't want to buy the book, The Gift of Being Yourself, it's by Basil Pennington. Basil Pennington. At least pay attention for these next several slides. Well, to know him, you got to spend time with him. You need to spend time alone with Jesus. Honestly, some of us are a little afraid to do that. What if I don't want to do what he wants me to do? What? First of all, regular personal devotions and prayer. Now, I'll admit, my wife knows, Sue knows, that I'm not a big praying person. It's always been difficult for me. And I don't have a very good view of authority because my dad was passive and my mother was aggressive and abusive. And so authority is now, so it's kind of always been difficult. But Anyway, for several decades now, I've been using a small devotional called Our Daily Bread. I don't have my phone with me. You can either order for free their 3-month little booklets that will have a devotional for each day of those 3 months. It provides you a scriptural passage and a short little devotional, maybe a prayer or verse at the end, and takes you maybe 3 minutes at the most. But do something. You can find lots of online tools that are only going to take you a couple of minutes. It's all it takes. But if what we're told is that if you do something at the same time of day for 2 weeks straight, 14 days in a row, you have developed a habit. And you will want to keep doing it. And the further you get into doing that small little devotional, the more interesting it becomes, the more you look forward to it, and the more it's something you really want to do. I haven't done it yet today because I get up at 5:30 this morning to get to the gym so I can be back in time for my 8 o'clock breakfast. But start somewhere. Start small. Don't think that a true morning devotional is about 10 to 15 minutes of reading and then another 10 to 15 minutes of prayer. Well, if you approach it that way, you're going to burn yourself out. And you quit after a couple days, and I can't do this. That's why start small, start short, start simple. Regular worship with other believers. If you're going away to college, visit a few of the local churches, find one that seems to fit you well, and start going. You need to be around not just other believers your own age, but you need to be in a church environment where there's people across the age spectrum. Some of these folks are probably used to seeing young college students suddenly show up, and they might invite you home for lunch sometime or whatever and get to know you some, and those can be quite valuable relationships. Regular fellowship with other believers. This is where I strongly suggest that you join some campus ministry, whether it's crew or navigators or intervarsity. Maybe the church you're attending has its own college group. Get involved with other believers of your age, other college students. Sometimes that can be really helpful because well, you may have somebody in that group who has had your professor before, this or that class, and they can give you a few hints how to deal with it, how to interact with that particular professor. And God speaks. Get involved in service somewhere. For about 13 years now, I've been involved in our church's preschool ministry. Yeah, me. I work with 1-year-olds. They all turn 2 during the year, but they're all 1-year-old at the start of the year. I get the older ones, so they're about a year and 5-6 months when they come into my class, and they're toddlers. I love toddlers. It's fun. I tell a story. Actually, and the puppet Benny helps me tell the story. Benny talks like Grover from the Muppets.
Oh, you have to look up String Bean.
No, I don't have to
It's
look
a
at
puppet. It's from a camp.
Anyway, so I use the puppet. Kids like the puppet. What I do, however, that's the kids really love, is that before I start, I use Benny to greet each of them by name, and these big smiles come over their face. Now they know I'm talking. It's not the puppet that's talking, because when I'm doing with other kids, I can see they're watching my mouth. One's over there to the side. And when we're all done, well, then Benny says goodbye to each one. Because he, huh?
By name.
By name. Yeah, because then he's going to go into his cabinet and take a nap.
For a week.
Huh?
For a certain amount of time.
Pardon?
For a certain amount of time.
Yeah. He doesn't come out till a week later. He takes long naps.
What does he sound like?
Well, it kind of sounds like this, like Grover. So, also, study of God's Word and books written from a Christian perspective. Your devotional is not Bible study. It's a devotional, okay? So, after you get in the habit of having a regular devotional, try to put some time aside where you're going to choose a book of the Bible and you're just going to read a couple of chapters a day. You don't need to have some sort of Bible study guide to go through that particular book. You can, but read a couple of chapters a day. Start with maybe the book of John, book of Matthew. Just kind of read through it. Bible study, okay? Or get involved in a Bible study, either through your college group or at your church or somewhere where you're actually studying the Bible. Books written from a Christian perspective. That's what I needed when I was going to write on the book of Hebrews. So I should have gone to the Christian bookstore where they knew me because I was buying creationist books at the time. I was in there frequently. I need something short and cheap on the book of Hebrews. Got anything like that? If you've been in there before and they have some idea of who you are, they'll be a little bit better able to help find something that they think will be suitable for you. We've mentioned C.S. Lewis in here before, Mere Christianity. Several other of his books would be extremely helpful. Miracles. But you're going to get confused, okay? Not all this stuff is going to make perfect sense to you. Well, like I just said, the local Christian bookstore is a place to just, stop in every once in a while, take a look around. You don't have to buy any Jesus junk. Just, look at the bookshelves, see the kind of stuff they've got available, and just kind of educate yourself as to what sorts of literature you can find at the Christian bookstore. There's also pastors, there are college ministers, sometimes there are Christian faculty. If you do learn that there are some Christian faculty on your campus, whether they're in your area of study or not, see if you can make an appointment. Just go visit. Get their perspective of what this university is like and how, if I'm in this department or that department, how can I approach this? I'm a little concerned about whatever, and they might be able to really help you out. And they've had those kind of meetings before, so you won't be the first one. Then there's Probe Ministries. The top one there is Probe's website. Mrs. Sue is the web mistress, as she calls herself. She's not the webmaster. Why not? Why aren't you a webmaster like everybody else?
Because I'm a lady.
Ah.
I'm like, I think that she's a lady.
Okay. Also, the email address for Probe, simply info@probe.org. And then there's my email address, Bohlin@probe.org. Sue gave herself the simplest one because she set us all up with email, with a website, all that kind of stuff, when the internet was just coming online. And that's why we have such a simple address, probe.org. Hers is sue@probe.org. And that happens to be my personal phone number. Now, I have to tell you that with the increased rise of telemarketers, spam calls, especially for an older person like myself, they just come in like crazy. I will not answer my phone unless I see an identity for the person. If you want to call me, I suggest you send me a text, identify yourself, I'll see your number, and I can put you in my phone with your phone. If you call, then I'll see it's you. I'll see who it is. If the first name is Caleb, I know it's got to be from Mind Games. Well, the basic idea here is that there really aren't any shortcuts. There's work to be done. it's a mistake to simply go to a secular university, even today, a Christian university, and think you can just go through and you'll be fine. No. There are many Christian universities, for the most part, the vast majority of them, their biology and life sciences departments are filled with theistic evolutionists. It's just the way it is. You have to go to very specific universities to find those who are not. Liberty University in Virginia, Bryan College in Tennessee, very small liberal arts school. Biola in Southern California. For the undergraduate programs, you'll find intelligent design focused biologists. Some of them are even are actually doing research. But there's just going to be work to do. You can't just turn your brain off and learn. It's not the way it's going to work. Everything you're going to be told will be coming from a particular worldview. And part of what we hope now you're able to do after this week is be able to identify most likely what a person's worldview is. Your professors will be talking to you a lot, and it won't be hard to figure it out. Even in some Christian universities, people who teach in the religion department, you can't trust a lot what they have to say. They've got tenure, and they're going to teach what they want to teach. So if you're going to a Christian university, don't think you could just kind of turn your brain off. So, second, cultivate a teachable spirit. Nearly all teachers respect a teachable attitude. And as I said, too many Christians come across as not teachable, particularly if they're being taught something that at least they think is contrary to their faith and their beliefs. The thing you need to realize is that you're there to learn, not to teach. I know there was a film that came out quite a few years ago now about a Christian who went to college and ended up having some conversations, almost debates with some of his professors. God isn't dead, yeah. Don't do that. Don't follow that example. Don't follow the example of God isn't dead.
God's not dead.
There's a film, God's Not Dead. Have you seen it?
Yes, it's a good movie.
Well, but don't do that. Don't do that. It's likely not going to go well for you. The individual there in that film he was reading from a script. He wasn't thinking that in the moment, okay? And I guarantee you, most of your professors have heard some of these objections before. They've dealt with Christians like you before, and they know how to answer you and, honestly, put you down. Make sure you don't ever try to do that again. And we'll get to how you handle those situations here in a little bit. The most effective tactic is the art of asking questions. I refer to it as an art form because it takes a little bit of practice. What I learned late in my undergrad and certainly by my graduate program at University of North Texas, if I thought the professor said something that either I didn't like or I thought might have been exaggerated, I didn't challenge him or her. I simply asked for more information. What did you mean when you said? That kind of question, first of all, tells the person, the teacher, the instructor, that you're paying attention. I guarantee you, professors look out into their classrooms and they can tell most people in that class are not paying attention. They know. Also shows you're interested. You want to make sure you understood what was said. And often by doing that, you'll get them to admit their own mistakes. I'm going to take you back to something I talked about the very first night. I was at the University of North Texas, and as a graduate student, we had a couple of, during the 3 years I was there, seminar classes for all the graduate students in the Department of Ecology and Evolution, and all 5 professors were also a part of those discussions. They didn't lead discussions, but they were there to participate. And the second time we had one of those, we were reading E.O. Wilson's book on human nature. And he had just gotten through in the book making the point that the only purpose of any organism, which is what we are, is to survive and reproduce. And, okay, I knew exactly where I wanted to go with that, but I wasn't going to get there by trying to give a lecture. So I started with a question. I said, okay, you're telling me that the only purpose in life is to survive and reproduce. Let's just assume that I'm dead, I'm in the ground, I'm talking to a biologist here, so I said, decomposers are doing their thing. Okay. What difference does it make to me now whether I reproduced or not? Yeah, quite a few seconds of silence followed that. Finally, one of the professors, the man who was the acting head of the department at the time, Dr. Fitzgerald, and he speaks up and he says, well, ultimately, I guess it really doesn't matter. I said, well, now, wait a minute. First you tell me the only purpose in life is to survive and reproduce, and now you tell me that ultimately that doesn't matter. So what's the point? Why go on living? Why stop at red lights? Who cares? Another quite a few seconds of silence goes by. And I think since that professor knew he's the one who got them into this, he spoke up again. And he said, well, I guess then that in the future, those that will be selected for, in other words, those who will continue to survive and reproduce, will be those who know there is no purpose in life, but will live as if there is. That's exactly where I wanted to go. But it made such a greater impact when one of the professors said that than if I had gotten up and tried to take him down that road. And in the days that followed, I approached a few of the grad students in there and some that I knew rather well. And so, when you remember the questions I asked in our seminar class? I said, yeah. Well, what do you think of Dr. Fitzgerald's responses to my questions? Well, I don't know. I thought he kind of overstated things a little bit there, and indicating they weren't quite sure they were happy with it. I said, but you followed his evolutionary logic. Oh yeah, that made perfect sense. But there was something inside them that was saying, I don't like that. There's something wrong with that. That's the image of God within. Something wasn't setting right. They followed the logic of it. They agreed with the logic of it, but they didn't like where it took them. So, Jesus, Luke 2:46. That's the passage where Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were in Jerusalem, and they're with other family, and they've left, and they're assuming Jesus is with some of the other family members. They start looking around, and he's not there. So they have to rush back into Jerusalem. They find him near the temple grounds, and he's sitting with scribes and Pharisees, and it says, listening to them and asking them questions. Now, Jesus wasn't asking questions to figure things out for himself. He was asking questions to get them to think about their own answers. That's all I'm suggesting here. Doing the same thing. Asking questions to allow the people you're speaking with to think about what they've just said. Now, 1 Peter 3:15, sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence, or gentleness and respect. I quoted this at the end of the professor routine on Sunday night, saying there is no more basic question you could be asked than why are you a Christian? And you ought to have worked your way through some short response to that at least offers some of the evidence for the existence of God, for the person of Christ, for the Bible, that's satisfactory to you, that's convincing to you, that you could give in like a 3 or 4 minute answer. You ought to have something worked out in your mind. How would I answer that question in the future? But with most people, well, it's kind of a double-edged sword, as I like to say. You can give a defense with no grace. And I gave you plenty of scriptural passages to look up. Proverbs 15:1 is a harsh word brings back wrath. A gentle answer brings back respect. Okay? Or you could be someone who's quite gentle but intimidated by the tough questions. People ask you tough questions, you just kind of wilt and you turn around and go the other way. Bull in the China shop is the one defense with no grace. You can go to either extreme, and neither one is going to be helpful to the person you're talking to. So, think Christianly, develop a Christian worldview, cultivate a teachable spirit, and then pursue excellence. Nothing attracts the attention of those in the academic world better than a job well done. I like this from Colossians 3:17. And whatever you do in word or deed, that kind of covers all of it, right? Do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. Now, let's just suppose, if you go back to your last year in school here, high school, and somebody, one of your instructors, whatever, says, okay, say you're in a Christian school or you're being homeschooled, or just the idea occurs to you that at the end of every homework assignment, at the end of every test, at the end of every paper you write, you write down, performed by a disciple of Jesus Christ. Think you might want to have that back and maybe redo a few things? What does it say? It says, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. Well, try to make it personal to you. Think about that. How would you approach things differently if perhaps that's what God has instructed you to do? That's what God has led you to do. Performed by a disciple of Jesus Christ. For most people, there's a lot of stuff they'd like to have back. Well, we appreciate people who do things right and do them well. Okay. I don't know why that other one's still there. Now, doing your best doesn't mean you're going to get an A. Sometimes doing your best is a B. Sometimes doing your best is a C. When I took physics at the University of Illinois, it was physics light. It was physics for life science majors, and I got C's in both courses. That's about the best I could do. I got A's and B's in all my biology and chemistry classes, but that one, physics, not my favorite. But I passed. I did the best I could, okay? And strangely, still, God chooses to work through people. God still chooses to work through people. We have a mystery here. God's sovereignty, our responsibility. Whatever the end result is, that was God's sovereignty in your life. Do you have a role to play in that? Yes, you do. God just doesn't pick you up and automatically, robotically get you along till you get to the spot he wants. No, we somehow have a role in that. Nobody can really explain that to you. But we still have a mystery here. God is sovereign, but we still have a responsibility for the things we do, the things we say, the things we even think. If you pursue excellence, they will respect you even if they don't agree with you. That was one of my great benefits at University of North Texas. The professor I ended up working for was the evolution professor. He taught the courses on evolution to the graduate students. And but he was able to see that, okay, when I was asking an evolutionary question, I gave the evolutionary answers simply to demonstrate that I knew what they wanted me to think. Now, nowhere was it asked, do you believe all the stuff you just wrote? No, they don't ask you that, you know. I was just telling them that I knew what they wanted me to know. And so over time, there was a respect that grew. And I'll never forget, I don't know what prompted him to say this, but we'd had a few discussions about Christianity and about science and as a believer, and he just told me that, Ray, I'm going to have it, I don't think he did this, but he said, I'm going to have it put in my will to somehow let you know if I make it or not, if you trust Christ. That he had respect. Okay? I wasn't the absolute best student around, but he knew I was working at it. And I was trying to learn what he was trying and others were trying to tell me. Now, I mentioned Daniel 1:17 and 20. You know about Daniel. When Babylon took over Jerusalem, they sacked it. They took a lot of the articles out of the temple. We don't really know what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. Some people actually think it's in this little place in Africa, East Africa. The priests, monks who have control of it, don't let anybody go into this little room. Okay? We don't know. But anyway, many were taken captive, and Nebuchadnezzar ordered that some of the best and brightest be taken aside, and as I like to say, were sent to Babylon University. Of course, they had a little problem with their diet, and they worked it out with the person who was over all them, and they didn't eat any of the food that was sacrificed to idols and that sort of thing, and they got along just fine. But at the end of their 3 years, Nebuchadnezzar interviewed them. Now, to these 4 young men, we're told, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and they didn't learn anything Hebrew. They learned everything that was Babylonian. Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. They were given a task. Learn all this Babylonian religion, literature, history, and they learned it better than anybody else. They showed themselves approved. Did they believe it? No, they didn't believe any of it, as we see through the rest of the book of Daniel. But they learned it. And they ended up getting some pretty high places in the Babylonian government, especially Daniel. Pursuing excellence. Anybody know who that is? Winston Churchill. Yes, it is. As you pursue excellence, don't be deterred by mistakes. We're all human. You'll make mistakes. The point is, learn from your mistakes. Don't just get up and go do other things. You beat yourself up. No, learn from your mistakes. Thomas Edison. He had a couple of researchers that he put onto a particular project. I don't know what it was. But eventually, after several months, they came back to Thomas Edison and said, look, we've tried over 700 ways how to make this work, and we just can't do it. We need to give us some other assignment. Oh, he said, oh, no. You now know 700 ways how not to do this. You're ahead of everybody else. Probably not what they wanted to hear. But he ended up telling them, mistakes are your education. That's how you really learn things when you screw up. Okay? And then Winston Churchill. Churchill was the Prime Minister of Britain during World War II, and he was quite the orator. He was an extreme motivator, encourager, driver to fight, to keep going, to keep on. But after the war, he was no longer Prime Minister, and he had attended a male boarding school that takes you up through about 12 years old. Okay? And they invited Winston Churchill to come back to his alma mater, whatever, and to give a commencement address. And he agreed. And of course, the school tells the whole surrounding community, Winston Churchill's going to be here. He's going to give our commencement address. And everybody knew what a great orator he was, so the place was probably packed. And his opportunity comes, and he's a little kind of portly, and he kind of waddles up to the podium, and he just kind of puts his glasses down and looks at the boys and says, "Young men, never give up. Never give up. Never give up. Never, never, never." He turns around and goes, "Sit down." Now, basically, that's what he told Britain through 6 long years of World War II. They declared war on Germany in 1939. Germany declared war on us after Pearl Harbor, and that was in 1941. So 6 years of war. And that's what he told everybody for those 6 long years. Don't give up, don't give up, don't give up. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And all he's saying is that, yeah, we're going to screw up, we're going to make mistakes. They tried a raid, the British did, of one of the ports on the western coast of France, and it was a disaster. Absolute disaster. Well, they learned from the mistake. Okay. Unfortunately, in war, when you make mistakes, people die. And that's not a pleasant thing. Now, so, think Christianly, cultivate teachable spirit, pursue excellence, and then faithfulness. What I want to tell you here is that don't focus on the results. Primarily, this is hard for guys, but to focus on the process. If you focus on the results and you don't really get those kinds of results, depression can easily set in. Now, when I was at UTD and I was doing my doctoral work, the project I was working on was rather difficult. There are other labs around the country who are doing similar kinds of things. But we were trying to introduce a human gene into mouse cell mitochondria so that the mitochondria would function properly again. Went through many different rounds of transferring the DNA, got variable results, but we just couldn't isolate this gene, and it just drove me crazy. I'm a creationist, and I'm thinking they won't pay attention to me. I've got to have publishable results, Lord. I've got to have publishable results. I never published anything but my dissertation. God never gave me publishable results, okay? We'll go on with the story here. This is Mother Teresa. She exemplified faithfulness. Now, she and her order in India, she was in Calcutta, they were in various large cities in India, and they took care of the orphans and the homeless, mostly orphans. Sometimes orphans were just set afloat in the Ganges River and whatever happens, happens. Well, she would go and rescue them, and they would try to raise these kids, try to find adoptive homes here in the U.S. and so forth. And But it was difficult, dirty, hard work. And sometimes the kids didn't survive. Sometimes you couldn't find some place to put them. And it could be really heartbreaking. And I think it was 1979, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. So she's traveling from India to Stockholm, Sweden. She travels east, so she passes through the U.S., and she has a layover in New York City. And some people convinced her to give a little press conference. And one of the reporters, she calls on him and she says, well, Brother Teresa, with all of the orphans and homeless in Calcutta, you can't possibly hope to be successful. Why do you continue to do what you do? To this day, I love her answer. She said, God has not called us to success, but to faithfulness. I had Mrs. Sue calligraphy that for me, and in my office at UTD, I had that put on the wall next to my desk, and there were numerous times when I would be having an argument with God, driving from home to the lab, and I'd get me off, I'd sit down and said, okay, Lord, I can do this one more day. I can do this one. Sometimes it's one day at a time. I went through that. So I've told you already, I spent 8 years at UTD. I took the 1 year of coursework part-time over 2 years. And then it took me 5 years for my actual research in the laboratory and 1 more year to write the dissertation. And no publishable results. I'd even asked Dr. Breen, my supervisor, who I call the supervisor from hell, but you know, she was very mean, very mean. Has anybody else from the science department, from the biology department here, finished their dissertation with no publishable results? Nope. You're the first. Oh boy, what a thing to be known for. No publishable results. And but you know what? The fact that I have the PhD, you can check on it. It's from a secular university. Nobody's ever asked me when I'm at a university or college, so what are your publications from your doctoral research? Nobody's ever asked me that. They can go check my dissertation. It's available at the library. You can have one sent. You can have a copy made and one sent to you if you want. But that wasn't necessary. God didn't see that as being important for me. However, the PhD, as I said earlier this week, has opened many doors for me that would not have opened unless I had that PhD from a secular university. Now, I mentioned that Dr. Breen, Gail was her name, Gail Breen, was the supervisor from hell. I think I also mentioned this as well, that she came to UTD in 1980, and I graduated in 91, and I was her first PhD student graduate, first one to actually get their PhD. And I found out quite a few years later that I'm the only one. I was able to work with Dr. Breen because I realized it was like working for my mother. I knew how to go about doing that. As I said, told you my mother was mean and uncompromising, unloving. Can any of you imagine going through your childhood into your teen years and never being told by either parent that they love you? Nobody told us that. Nobody. When we brought report cards home, my mother would skip over the good marks and what happened here? Why'd you get a D here? Why'd you get an F in art? What? I got to, especially elementary school, I would, I could see, I knew the grades she would focus on, and I'd run it through in my head what it's likely going to be like, so that when it actually happened, it didn't hurt so bad. I was in a play my senior year in high school, and my parents were there, and nobody said a word. No compliments, no, good job, Ray, no. We never got affirmed in any way, shape, or form. So, Yeah, so I knew how to work with somebody like Gail Breen. First thing we had to do was when she came in down the hall, I think I mentioned this also, that she often came in with a hangover. And you can tell. Okay, bad day to talk to Dr. Breen. Maybe later. Okay. Now this comes from Oswald Chambers. And that's another daily devotional you can use, but Chambers takes you a little bit deeper than our daily bread would. He says, notice God's unutterable waste of saints, meaning all Christians, according to the judgment of the world. God plants his saints in the most useless places. Think of Mother Teresa. What could she really accomplish in Calcutta? We say, God intends me to be here because I'm so useful. But he says Jesus never estimated his life along the line of the greatest use. For instance, what did many Jews of that time want the Messiah to do? What did they expect him to do? Kick out the Romans. Get rid of the Romans, defeat them somehow, lead an army, whatever. Jesus didn't do that. That would have been really useful. Or it would have been really useful if he just kind of hung out a shingle and, on some home and said, healings 24/7. He didn't do that either. Now that would have been really useful. But Jesus didn't do that. Rather what he says is, Chambers says, God puts his saints where they will glorify him, and we are no judges at all of where that is. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, wherever you are is where God has planted you, and you are there to glorify him. It doesn't matter where it is, doesn't matter if you like it, doesn't matter if you wish you were someplace else. The fact is, that's where you are. Your task is to glorify him. That is God's will for your life at this moment in time. So use it to glorify him. The Lord will never, ever waste your time. He doesn't do that. As I just told you, I spent 5.5 years in a research project that completely failed. But that was not wasted time. I was learning. I was learning about molecular biology. I was learning about cell biology. I was learning how to interact with my professor, my supervisor. I was learning how to interact with other students. I had several spiritual conversations with some of those grad students. Nobody ever came to Christ, but I got a chance to be a witness. That's valuable. So, think Christianly. Develop a teachable spirit. Pursue excellence, what? As a basic form of Christian witness. Avoid the temptation of success at all costs and live your life in faithfulness to the one who has called you. Now, that statement she made, that Mother Teresa made about God has not called us to success but to faithfulness, that sounds rather un-American. And I've had some people criticize that statement for that very reason. It's the American dream, right? Go out, get a good job, get a good income, be successful. No, that's not what God has called us to. He's not called us to success. He's called us to faithfulness. That's what matters most. And that's what should matter most to you.